The ridge looked like any other stretch of forgotten high ground, but the soldiers who climbed it always slowed without meaning to, as if something in the air asked them to move quietly. The wind carried a hollow tone that didn't match the open sky. A thin whistle that sounded as though it had passed through hidden chambers before touching their ears. Even the sunlight felt muted here, falling across the rocks in a way that softened their edges and made the landscape look older than the map suggested. Nothing obvious stood out, yet every man felt a faint pressure settle on his shoulders. The moment he stepped onto the slope, they noticed small things first. The ground seemed to hold warmth a little longer than it should. Loose gravel didn't scatter naturally, but rolled in slow, reluctant arcs. When someone spoke, their voice felt slightly heavier, as if the air thickened around the words. No one mentioned it at first. Soldiers often blame such sensations on fatigue, altitude, or nerves. But as they approached the cliff face, where the cave mouth waited, each man felt the same quiet tightening in the chest. A subtle reminder that the ridge was watching. Sometimes when the group paused, they heard footsteps behind them, soft, measured, unhurried. Turning around revealed only the empty path they had climbed. Radios that had worked perfectly moments before crackled with static the second they faced the cave's direction, then cleared again once they stepped away. A thin metallic scent drifted up from the stone, almost like old machinery left to rust deep underground. No one could explain it, but no one could ignore it either. The ridge never threatened them. It simply observed, holding its silence with the patience of something that remembered every footstep ever taken across its surface. The first official mention of the ridge appeared in a brief reconnaissance report that seemed ordinary at a glance, yet something in its phrasing felt uneasy, as though the writer wanted to say more, but chose restraint instead. It described the terrain as unremarkable, stable, and clear for movement. But the sentences lingered strangely, avoiding direct detail. The soldier who wrote it noted unusual nighttime acoustics without explaining what they were. He mentioned that the wind occasionally carried a soft rhythmic knock, repeating with such consistency that it resembled deliberate tapping rather than natural echo. The report never identified a source. When questioned, members of the same patrol recalled hearing that knocking even when the air was still. Some thought it might be linked to old mine shafts, but a quick review of local geological archives revealed no such activity. No settlements and no excavation history. It was as if the ridge had been left untouched for generations, yet the sounds suggested movement beneath it. The final page of the report held the oddest line. Written without emphasis, almost hidden between routine notes. It read, "Avoid unnecessary descent into openings along the ridge." There was no explanation, no technical justification, no environmental concern listed beside it. Just that one sentence. As if the author had placed a warning there for reasons he didn't trust himself to describe. Later, Eunice, who read the report, felt unsettled without understanding why. The wording was calm, professional, but too careful, like a man choosing his steps in the dark. It neither exaggerated nor reassured. It simply left a gap between what was written and what was felt, a space wide enough for imagination to slip in, and for soldiers stationed nearby. That space was more disturbing than any dramatic claim could ever have been. The mouth of the cave appeared slowly as the soldiers approached, revealing itself not as a shadow in the rock, but as a shape that felt strangely deliberate. From a distance, it looked like any natural opening carved by erosion. But the closer they came, the more the details betrayed that illusion. The temperature shifted first. Warm desert air clung to their uniforms, yet just inches from the threshold, a sudden cold pressed against their skin. It wasn't the sharp cold of winter air, but something denser, like stepping into the breath of a deep well. One soldier reached out, expecting rough stone, and recoiled when the surface felt smooth and faintly warm, as if the cave were listening through the touch. Their flashlights cut only a few meters ahead, illuminating an archway so precise it could have been sculpted by machines. No grooves, no irregularities, no signs of tools or age. It looked untouched, preserved, unwilling to reveal how it came to be. When the beam of light passed across it, a pale shimmer danced along the curve. almost like a muscle tightening beneath skin. Inside, the air pulsed softly, slow rises, slow falls, spaced evenly, as though the cave exhaled at its own rhythm. No one could tell where the movement of air originated. It didn't feel like wind. It felt like breath. The soldiers exchanged quiet glances, unsure whether to acknowledge what they sensed or pretend it was. Imagination working overtime. Approaching the entrance forced them into a single file line. The passage narrowed just enough to prevent two men from standing side by side, yet widened again a few steps inward. The configuration made no geological sense. It felt intentional, like a doorway designed to test the patience or resolve of those who chose to enter. A faint hum vibrated through their boots, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat echoing through distant stone. None of them spoke about it. They simply hesitated at the threshold, listening to the rhythm, waiting for it to change, half expecting it to respond to their presence. But the cave remained still, as if waiting for them to make the next move inside the entrance. The first thing the soldiers noticed was the way sound refused to behave. When one of them spoke, his voice drifted forward normally, but the echo returned a second too late, stretched thin, as if traveling through a tunnel far deeper than the one in front of them. The delay was subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss, but once heard, it became impossible to ignore. Every sound they made came back slightly altered, like a memory replayed rather than an echo reflected. A soldier kicked a small pebble down the steps to test the acoustics. Instead of the expected ricochet of stone striking stone, the cave released a faint, sharp tick, as though something had caught the pebble midair, or perhaps absorbed it before it could fall naturally. The sound was too precise to be accidental, too controlled to belong to empty space. When they attempted to map the first stretch of tunnel, their compasses spun gently in their hands, refusing to settle on any direction. Even digital devices flickered with minor fluctuations, as if the cave interfered with their sense of orientation. The beam of each flashlight seemed slower than usual, trailing behind the movement of their hands by a fraction of a second. No one mentioned it, but each man saw it. The deeper they stepped, the more they noticed a quiet whispering. It wasn't language, nor was it wind slipping past stone. It came in soft breaths that matched the rhythm of their own inhalations. When they breathed deeper, the whisper deepened. When they held still, it paused. It mirrored them too closely to dismiss. At times, the whisper almost felt like another presence standing just beyond their sight, breathing with them not ahead or behind, but layered within the air itself. The soldiers found themselves speaking in softer tones without realizing why. As if not to disturb whatever was listening, one turned off his light briefly and swore he sensed someone standing inches away, invisible in the dark. When he switched the light back on, the passage remained empty, unchanged. Yet every man felt that same awareness, subtle and patient, waiting for them to continue downward. The first 3 steps felt different from the rest of the cave. They were carved too cleanly, too evenly, as if cut by a craftsman who understood stone intimately. Each edge was sharp, but not harsh, softened just enough to suggest intention rather than accident. When the soldiers stepped onto the first stone, a faint pressure settled behind their eyes light at first, almost pleasant, like the sensation of recalling a forgotten name. But the moment they tried to place the feeling, it slipped away. By the second step, several men experienced brief lapses in memory. One forgot why he was holding his rifle at the ready. Another thought he heard a familiar voice behind him, calling his name softly, though he knew no one in the unit spoke with that tone. The lapses were short, flickering across their minds like fading dreams. Each time clarity returned, the soldiers exchanged uneasy glances but continued downward, trying not to acknowledge the strangeness. On the third step, the effect deepened. One soldier suddenly believed he had already descended these same steps hours earlier. He remembered the angle of the light, the echo of a distant drip, even the faint vibration under his boots. But he also knew he had never been inside the cave before. The contradiction made his breath hitch. Another soldier experienced the opposite. He suddenly felt as though he had never met the men beside him. Their faces momentarily unfamiliar, despite years of serving together. None of the memories lingered long. They slipped away quickly, leaving only a soft ache behind the eyes and a quiet realization that the cave did more than hold silence. It nudged the mind gently, rearranging small pieces of thought. Yet despite the unease, every man felt compelled to take the next step, as though something ahead waited to be understood. By the fourth step, the air felt noticeably thicker, as if the cave had added weight to each breath the soldiers drew. Their movements slowed slightly, not from fatigue, but from the subtle resistance around them. The way air feels underwater, dense, patient, reluctant to let anything move quickly. A stopwatch clipped to one soldier's vest recorded a strange shift. Seconds stretched just a little longer than they should have. 3 became 4. 4 became nearly 5. The change was slight but unmistakable. Quiet distortion that tightened the space between heartbeats. Voices echoed oddly here. When someone whispered, the sound didn't travel forward, but seemed to expand sideways, brushing faintly against the walls. Their boots made muted thuds, as if the cave swallowed the impact, leaving only a dull imprint of sound behind. The deeper they went, the more the silence felt layered, like a place where many sounds had once existed, but were now held in suspension. On step 5, a soldier crouched to examine a symbol carved into the stone. It wasn't rough or weathered. Instead, it vibrated faintly under his fingertips, a soft trembling that felt alive rather than mechanical. The pattern was simpler, curve intersected by a single line, yet it felt intentional. Placed with purpose long before any human patrol ever entered the cave. No one could identify its meaning, but every man sensed it wasn't decorative. It was a marker, a reminder, or perhaps a warning. By step 6, time felt even thicker. One soldier described the sensation as walking through a slow-moving dream where each motion trailed behind the body. Their flashlight seemed to drag slightly, the beam lagging by a fraction of a second each time they turned. Still, none of them stopped. Something ahead pulled them forward gently, like a memory trying to finish itself. Step 7 felt different the moment the first boot touched it. The air around the soldiers tightened, not with pressure, but with a strange attentiveness, as if the cave paused to listen. Then the whispering began. It didn't arrive from a direction, nor did it echo off the stone. It surfaced gently within the space around them, a soft voice counting in a slow, steady rhythm. Always beginning at 1. Always ending at 7. Never once reaching 8. The voice carried no tone, neither male nor female, just a calm, measured counting that felt older than the cave itself. At first, the soldiers thought it might be some acoustic trick, air slipping through unseen cracks. But the whisper matched their breathing too closely. Rising when they inhaled, softening when they exhaled, as if it sensed their rhythm and shaped itself around them. One soldier leaned slightly forward, trying to locate the source. The moment he focused too hard, the whisper pressed deeper, sliding along his spine like a cold hand. It was not threatening. It simply wanted attention. Another soldier described the sensation as remembering a lullaby he had never heard. A strange familiarity that didn't belong to any memory he owned. The counting never accelerated, never faltered. 1, 2, 3. Spoken with a calmness that felt almost soothing until the mind realized it was hearing something impossible. With each repetition, the whisper seemed to settle closer to their bones, resonating faintly inside their ribs. Several men shifted uncomfortably, feeling as though the cave was preparing them for something just beyond step 7. When the counting stopped abruptly, the silence that followed felt heavier than sound. It lingered expectantly, as though the next step would answer a question the cave had been asking for a very long time. Step 8 carried a silence the soldiers were not prepared for. It wasn't the absence of sound they noticed, but the disappearance of something they had taken for granted, the rhythm of their own footsteps. The moment the first man stepped down, the familiar crunch of boot on stone vanished completely. His foot moved, his body shifted, but the cave offered nothing in return. No echo, no soft scrape, not even the faint vibration they had felt earlier. It was as if the sound had been removed from the world rather than absorbed. The soldier behind him watched carefully, expecting at least a muted thud, but the movement unfolded in perfect silence. When his turn came, the same thing happened. The instant his weight settled on step 8, the noise simply ceased. He lifted his foot again, tapped the ground lightly, still nothing. It was like standing on memory rather than stone. A recording device clipped to the lead soldier's vest captured every breath, every whisper, every rustle of fabric. But when they reviewed the audio later, the moment they reached step 8, the rhythmic pattern of footsteps ended abruptly. The soundtrack remained clear, but the footsteps were erased from existence. Leaving long stretches of movement with no audible trace, the silence created an unsettling illusion. Some soldiers began to feel as though they weren't the ones walking. Rather, they were following footsteps already taken by someone else. The shape of the path seemed predetermined, the air faintly warmer in the exact spots where a foot would naturally land. One man described it with quiet certainty. It feels like stepping into someone else's path. Someone who isn't here anymore? Others reported the opposite sensation. They felt footsteps ahead of them, soft impressions of weight shifting on the stone, though the tunnel in front remained completely empty. At one point, the lead soldier froze, lifting his light upward as if expecting a figure to appear. He was certain he had heard a quiet exhale just ahead, too close, too human, too real to dismiss. Yet every time their flashlight swept the stone, nothing moved. The passage stretched out in patient stillness, offering no clue as to who or what had walked there before them by the time they reached the next step. The soldiers no longer trusted their own sense of presence. Their movements felt borrowed, their path inherited, as though the cave had already decided the order in which they would descend. The first disappearance forced the unit into a rescue operation they were not trained for. A soldier who had descended past step 13 vanished without a sound. His flashlight beam swallowed mid-movement, leaving the tunnel strangely darker than before. When his team tried calling his name, their voices felt muffled, as if pushed back toward them instead of traveling forward. A rescue group was assembled within minutes, but the cave greeted them with a stillness that suggested it had already made its decision as the team moved downward. Their equipment began to malfunction in quiet, unnerving ways. Radios that had worked perfectly near the entrance now transmitted only a low, vibrating hum-a-steady tone that didn't fluctuate with movement or distance. The sound wasn't static, nor was it interference. It felt more like a deep resonance, as though the cave were humming back at them, matching their attempts to communicate with a frequency of its own. When the first rescuer aimed his flashlight ahead, the beam bent subtly to the left, illuminating the stone at an angle that didn't make sense. He adjusted the light, thinking it was his hand, but the beam arced again, this time drifting downward as if pulled toward an unseen point. Others noticed their lights behaving similarly, tracing gentle curves instead of straight lines, illuminating corners that weren't there, and revealing shapes that vanished the moment they tried to focus on them. The most unsettling moment came when the team stopped to listen. From somewhere ahead, farther down the passage, beyond where light could reach, they heard breathing. Slow, rhythmic, unmistakably human. It wasn't frantic or pained. It sounded calm, almost meditative, as if the missing soldier were standing just around a bend, resting quietly. One rescuer whispered the soldier's name, and the breathing paused, then resumed, perfectly in sync with their own inhalations. Infrared scanners detected nothing. The space ahead appeared empty, holding no heat signature, no movement, no living form. Yet the breathing continued for several minutes, steady and unbroken, even as the team advanced carefully. At one point, the sound seemed to pass directly beside them, brushing the air near their helmets like a person walking by in darkness. But no one walked there. The deeper they pushed, the more the cave folded their senses into confusion, blurring sound, bending light, erasing distance. Eventually, they were forced to retreat not out of fear, but out of the quiet realization that whatever had taken their companion wasn't something they could follow. The cave had already decided who would return, and who wouldn't. The 13th step revealed itself only when the soldiers stood directly above it. From a distance, it seemed ordinary. Another smooth stone cut into the descent. But when they placed their weight upon it, something shifted not in the stone but in the space around them. The step felt slightly higher than it had moments earlier, as though it had risen to meet their boots. On another attempt, it felt lower, making their legs reach farther than expected. Each time someone tested it, the measurement changed by just enough to unsettle the mind while keeping doubt alive. Their shadows reacted first. Under the beams of their flashlights, the silhouettes stretched unnaturally long, reaching into the darkness ahead as if eager to continue without their owners. One soldier lifted his arm, watching the shadow drift a heartbeat before he moved, lagging behind like a hesitant companion. When he lowered his hand, the shadow dropped too quickly, snapping into place with an unnatural jerk. The men exchanged quiet glances but said nothing. Acknowledging it felt like inviting it closer. The acoustics changed too. When a soldier spoke, his voice reached the others normally. But the echo returned late and hollow, traveling through a tunnel far deeper than the one they stood in. It wasn't an echo of the words, it was an echo of the intention. A long whisper stretched thin, repeating the shape of the voice rather than the sound. It made their speech feel distant, almost foreign, as if their own voices didn't fully belong to their bodies anymore. Each man stepping onto the SH step felt a curious delay in his movements. When they breathed, the air hesitated before entering their lungs. When they blinked, the moment of darkness seemed longer than a simple reflex. Time thinned itself here, losing its familiar structure. Stretching and folding like a fabric, the cave held loosely between unseen hands. A gentle vibration pulsed through the stone, a heartbeat, faint enough to question, steady enough to remember. The men tried to remain still, hoping to learn whether the vibration changed with their presence. But the rhythm continued unchanged, indifferent to their bodies, as though the step belonged to someone or something that had been waiting far longer than any human foot. Standing there, they realized the descent no longer felt like moving downward. It felt like approaching a threshold that had no interest in being crossed, a step that watched them choose whether to continue. The turn beyond the 13th step did not look unusual at first. The passage curved gently to the right, or at least that's what the eye insisted. But when the soldiers moved forward, the sensation of turning never arrived. Their bodies did not shift, their balance did not adjust, and their boots felt as though they continued in a straight line, even as the walls appeared to drift sideways. It was a turn without motion, a change in direction without the physical act of changing direction. The deeper they advanced, the more the geometry betrayed its own shape. The air warmed suddenly, carrying a soft exhale that brushed across their necks. It felt intimate, almost familiar, like someone standing just behind them breathing gently into the tunnel. The warmth should have been comforting, but it unsettled the group because moments earlier, the entire cave had been cold enough to numb their fingers. Now the warmth moved in intervals, flowing through the passage like a silent tide. Rising and fading with no correlation to their steps, a faint hum traveled upward through their boots. It was nothing like the earlier vibrations. This one pulsed. In careful rhythms, steady and patient, as if echoing a language older than sound. When the soldiers paused, the hum continued beneath them, ignoring their stillness, vibrating through the stone with a calm determination. It felt less like the cave was reacting to them, and more like it was continuing a process that had begun long before they arrived. As they pressed on, their lights dimmed, not from battery loss, but as though the darkness ahead thickened and swallowed the beam. Flashlights that had illuminated 30 feet now reached barely 10. Soldier lifted his light higher, and the beam curved downward, bending toward the stone floor like a branch weighed by unseen pressure. Attempts to brighten the lights only made the bend more obvious. The cave was directing their vision, choosing what they were allowed to see, and then, without warning, the first man vanished. It wasn't dramatic. There was no cry, no stumble, no slip of boots against stone. His light simply blinked out. The hum beneath their feet softened, as if absorbing the moment. When the soldiers rushed forward, the passage swallowed their voices. Turning shouts into thin threads of sound, they saw no body, no dropped gear, no trace of motion, only the warm, slow exhale drifting from the path ahead, waiting for the next step to be taken. When the soldier finally returned, he did not arrive with urgency or confusion. He simply appeared at the cave's entrance as though he had stepped through a doorway only seconds earlier. The men waiting outside froze when they saw him. His uniform was clean, his boots untouched by moisture, dust, or debris. A medic crouched to examine them, expecting the dampness and grit common in deep cave passages. But the leather was bone-dry, as if he had walked across warm concrete instead of descending into a place where condensation clung to every surface. The real strangeness lay in the time. According to the external logs, he had been missing for 12 full hours. But his watch, still ticking steadily on his wrist, insisted that only 2 minutes had passed. The discrepancy made no physical sense. His pulse was steady, his breathing calm, almost too calm, as if he had been sitting in silence rather than navigating impossible corridors beneath the earth. When the others asked him where he had gone, he hesitated before speaking. His words came slowly, each one chosen with unnatural care, as if he were learning language by memory rather than instinct. He struggled to form sentences, pausing mid-thought, searching for meanings that seemed to slip just out of reach. At times, he repeated small phrases under his breath, as if testing their shape before committing them aloud. He didn't sweat. He didn't tremble. His gaze drifted over the men around him, but never settled on their faces for long. He blinked less than he should have, and when he did, the motion seemed delayed, as though the reflex belonged to a body still adjusting to itself. Most unsettling of all was the way. He held his hands close to his ribs, fingers slightly curled as if protecting something unseen. When asked what he remembered, he didn't describe panic or disorientation. Instead, he said only that the cave had felt quiet, too quiet, like it was waiting for me to notice something. Then he looked toward the darkness behind the entrance, not with fear, but with the calm of someone who had heard a voice the others could not. When the soldier finally began to describe what happened beyond Step 13, his voice remained steady, but there was a distant quality to it, as if he were recalling someone else's memory instead of his own. He said he did not walk into a tunnel, but into a hallway that felt alive in its stillness. According to him, the counting never stopped, not spoken aloud, not whispered through the air, but rising from inside his bones. Each number vibrated faintly through his ribs, traveling upward like a slow pulse. He claimed he didn't hear it with his ears at all. He felt it. He told them he kept moving forward, though he wasn't sure if his feet were touching stone or something softer, something that shifted gently beneath every step. The hallway never darkened or brightened. It simply existed, extending in a way his eyes could not fully measure. At one point, he realized the counting no longer matched his steps. It moved ahead of him, as though leading him downward through steps he hadn't yet taken. When pressed about what he saw, he frowned slightly, as if the memory were fragile. He said the hallway had no end. Yet somewhere far ahead he sensed a presence waiting, not a creature, not a voice, but a quiet awareness that recognized him. He felt it observing the rhythm of his breath, matching the rise and fall as if learning him. He insisted he never reached the bottom. And yet, with equal certainty, he claimed something at the bottom was aware of him. He described the unsettling sensation of moving upward while feeling his body descend, as if gravity were being rewritten in gentle increments. Time folded strangely. What felt like moments stretched into something larger and collapsed again into seconds. He remembered turning around, though he wasn't sure if he physically turned or if the hallway rotated around him. The counting faded gradually, sinking deeper into his chest until it was gone. Leaving a hollow quiet, when he realized he was back at the entrance, he wasn't surprised. It felt, he said, like the cave had decided his visit was complete. In the days that followed, specialists tried to make sense of the cave, each bringing their own logic to a place that resisted explanation. Geologists examined the ridge and insisted the chamber was unfinished, as if some ancient pressure had shaped only the outer layers before stopping abruptly. They found no debris, no loose stone, no signs of collapse, only smooth, deliberate walls carved in silence. Historians searched old records, hoping for legends or forgotten mining routes. But the archives remained blank, so the mountain had deliberately erased its own past. Local villagers offered a simpler interpretation. They said the cave breathed, not metaphorically, but truly drawing in the world at long intervals and releasing it again with patience. They claimed the mountain had always chosen who reached the end and who would return before understanding too much. Most listeners dismissed the stories as superstition, but none could ignore the data recorded by sensors placed near the entrance. Every 14 hours, without fail, the air pressure dipped and rose in a slow cycle, mimicking an inhale and exhale, scaled to the lungs of something vast. The soldiers who monitored the readings never joked about it. They sat quietly, watching the graphs shift, feeling the rhythm echo faintly in their own chests. Some believed it was natural. Some believed it was ancient. A few believed it was alive in a way that defied the definitions they knew. No one ever mapped beyond step 13. Every attempt ended at the same invisible boundary, a line the cave never allowed them to cross. Over time, the military sealed the entrance not out of fear, but out of respect. As though closing the door to a room that wasn't meant for human footsteps, yet even sealed, the cave waited. Its breathing never stopped,